After Prime Minister Modi's power play, the BRICS nations have backed India and Brazil's inclusion as permanent members of the United Nations Security Council. Modi also demanded reforms in global bodies.
And therefore, he underscored the importance of reforming the multilateral organizations.
He elaborated, stating, quote, "In the age of AI, where technology is updated every week, it is not acceptable for global institutions not to be updated even once in 80 years. 21st century software cannot be run on 20th century typewriters," unquote. Modi's call for UNSC reform was also backed in the BRICS joint statement prepared by Brazil, stating, quote, "We reiterate our support for comprehensive reforms of the United Nations, including its Security Council, to make it more democratic, representative, effective, and efficient," unquote.
That the attack, the Pahalgam attack, terror attack, is an onslaught on the entire humanity.
Now, what's ironic is that the current president of the United Nations Security Council for the month of July 2025 is none other than Pakistan, the global factory of terror groups. But it's a rotational presidency. Even the global capital of piracy, Somalia, will be the UNSC president for the month of January 2026. What only matters is a permanent seat at the high table still occupied by veto-wielding P5 nations. Soon, India will be taking over the BRICS chairmanship, however, for the next full year, and the agenda of the BRICS under Modi is going to be clear: zero tolerance to state-sponsored terror. In a veiled warning to Pakistan, the BRICS nations backed India's stance on the Pahalgam terror attack. The joint statement declared, quote, "We condemn in the strongest terms the terror attack in Jammu and Kashmir on the 22nd of April 2025, during which 26 people were killed and many more injured. We reaffirm our commitment to combating terror in all its forms and manifestations, including the cross-border movement of terror groups, terror financing, and safe havens," unquote. During Prime Minister Modi's address at the 17th BRICS summit in Brazil's Rio, the Indian Prime Minister delivered one of the most brutal attacks on Pakistan for supporting terror groups during his address. Also, in a veiled dig to Pakistan's backers, including China and Turkey, Modi called out countries for their double standards on terror. He elaborated, "On a subject like terror, there is no room for double standards. If any country provides direct or indirect support to terror, it must pay the price for it." Is this also a dig at the United States and Trump, who summoned Pakistan Army Chief after India's military Operation Sindoor? Prime Minister Modi reminded the world leaders at the BRICS summit that victims and supporters cannot be weighed on the same scale, while calling the Pahalgam attack a blow to the soul of India and to humanity itself. Remember, a Pakistan-backed terror group, the TRF, had claimed responsibility for the cowardly attack on unarmed Indian tourists in Kashmir in front of their families. The BRICS joint statement fully backed India's stance, saying, "We condemn in the strongest terms the terror attack in Jammu and Kashmir on the 22nd of April 2025. We urge to ensure zero tolerance to terror and reject double standards in countering terror," unquote. However, the joint declaration did not openly mention Pakistan. In geopolitics and statecraft, often the strongest messages are shielded behind carefully worded statements. Now, during the 2017 BRICS summit held in China's Xiamen, the declaration had openly named Pakistan-based terror groups, including Lashkar and Jaish, along with the TTP, as regional security concerns. But the name Pakistan was not mentioned back in 2017 statement either. It didn't need to. The world knows which country is the global factory of terror. The Rio Declaration also stated, "We look forward to further deepening counter-terror cooperation. We call for an expeditious finalization and adoption of the Comprehensive Convention on International Terrorism in the UN framework. We call for concerted actions against all UN-designated terror groups and terror entities," unquote. In Brazil, Prime Minister Modi held discussions with leaders from BRICS member countries and 10 partner nations. The focus of these meetings were key global issues such as reform of global governance, enhancing the voice of the global south, peace and security, climate change, artificial intelligence, governance, and multilateralism. In light of China's ban on rare earth minerals causing disruption in the Indian economy, Prime Minister Modi warned of China's market monopoly and weaponization of trade, while urging BRICS nations to ensure that critical mineral supply chains remain secure, reliable, and free from geopolitical coercion. Prime Minister Modi declared, "It's important to ensure that no country uses these resources for its own selfish gain or as a weapon against others." Unquote. It is important to note that even India's Quad allies recently formed a framework to diversify their critical mineral supply chains away from China. At BRICS, the Indian Prime Minister also addressed sessions on reform of global governance and peace and security, and strengthening multilateral economic financial affairs and artificial intelligence. During his address, Modi emphasized the need for urgent reforms in global institutions like the United Nations Security Council, the IMF, the World Bank, and the WTO to reflect contemporary realities. Remember, India and Brazil are the leading contenders for the next UNSC permanent seats whenever the global body is reformed. Modi also urged greater support for developing countries with better access to climate finance and technology, and called out the double standards faced by the global south on development and security issues. Additionally, Prime Minister Modi also presented 4 key suggestions to the BRICS, which are ensuring the new development bank follows a demand-driven and sustainable approach, establishing a science and research repository for the global south, securing critical mineral supply chains, and promoting responsible AI while encouraging innovation. The summit came to an end with the adoption of the Rio de Janeiro Declaration. On the sidelines of the summit, Modi also held bilateral talks with Brazilian President Lula da Silva to broaden strategic partnership in areas such as trade, defense, energy, technology, and health. These discussions continued in Brasilia during Prime Minister Modi's state visit after the BRICS summit. Modi also interacted with the Indian diaspora and reaffirmed India's commitment to constructive contributions on global issues, particularly those affecting the developing nations. Now, clearly the rise of BRICS is being watched the world over, and it has rattled America. Donald Trump has now threatened 10% tariffs on any nation aligning itself with the BRICS countries. Trump accused BRICS of anti-America policies. Now, Trump's reasons for worry may be justified. Already, the BRICS represents 56% of the global population and 44% of global GDP. If BRICS nations adopt a currency, it would be the biggest setback to the US dollar and free from any US sanctions threats. However, so far, while Russia, backed by China, are pushing for a BRICS common currency, on the other hand, India and Brazil have rejected any such move. It remains to be seen if Trump's tariff threats will influence this decision. On the margins of the summit, Modi also used his presence in Brazil to strengthen ties with world leaders and dignitaries of different countries. He reportedly met Cuban President Miguel to explore cooperation in pharma, UPI, Ayurveda, and digital infrastructure. Modi also held talks with Malaysian Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim, thanking Malaysia for its prompt condemnation of the Pahalgam terror attack. Modi's state visit to Brazil is expected to focus on defense cooperation as well, with the Akash air defense system in focus.
They also seem to be interested in the Akash air defense system.
Donald Trump's tariff threat is clearly directed towards all the BRICS member nations, especially the founding countries, namely Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, and now the new members. This tariff threat came only hours ahead of the July 9th tariff deadline, And till now, India and US have not announced any trade deal yet. But soon, after announcing the 10% tariff threat on BRICS, Donald Trump also announced that the US expects a trade deal with India soon. The US president stated, "We've made a deal with the United Kingdom, we've made a deal with China. We've made a deal. We are close to making a deal with India. Others we met with, we don't think we are going to be able to make a deal, so we just send them a letter." Trump has now slapped tariffs on 14 nations, including 25% tariffs on traditional US allies like Japan and South Korea. Meanwhile, despite being labeled as a White House stooge, Bangladesh's Yunus now has to contend with 35% tariffs from Donald Trump. Now the US administration led by Trump aims to pressure other countries against deepening ties with BRICS. The BRICS group has positioned itself as a counterweight to Western-led institutions and advocates for reform in global governance. The additional tariff threat underscores growing trade and geopolitical tensions between the US and the BRICS alliance. Now, India achieved several key gains during the BRICS Summit 2025. Firstly, India gained strong support for its bid to host the COP33 in 2028. This is a significant win that enhances India's global climate leadership, reports the TOI. The summit declaration reasserted BRICS unity in upholding Paris Agreement and called for collective action on climate change. This also aligned with India's priorities for sustainable development and climate finance for developing countries. Moreover, the summit very prominently reflected India's push to amplify the voice of Global South and reform global governance institutions, especially the UNSC, IMF, World Bank and the WTO. After multiple high-level bilateral meetings, India also deepened its ties with fellow BRICS members and emerging economies on agendas of trade, finance, technology and counter-terrorism. Lastly, India is set to take over the BRICS presidency in January 2026, thereby positioning itself to shape the summit's agenda and further its interests. But do you rate Modi's BRICS summit visit a success? Leave a comment with your opinion, hit the like button and subscribe to Inconnect News.